In my 35 years on the bench in Providence, I've seen people walk into my courtroom carrying much more than a parking ticket. I've seen fear, I've seen pride, I've seen shame dressed up as silence. But the morning a 9-year-old boy stood beside his mother and defended her with more courage than many grown men I've known, even I was left searching for words. If this touches your heart, leave a comment and stay with me, because what that child said changed the whole courtroom before I ever picked up my pen. Case looked ordinary when it was called. That's how life works sometimes. The biggest moments arrive wearing the plainest clothes. A stack of municipal violations sat in front of me, the kind we handled every day in Providence, in Trouden of Maiden now, in Trouden of Coordinaden now, and Daidens Teen and Naden. The Rhode Island parking meter violations, an expired inspection sticker, one ticket for blocking a loading zone, and another for parking too close to a hydrant. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would make anyone think the room was about to go still. I looked down at the file and saw the defendant's name, Elena Morales, 6 citations over a little more than 2 months. Now let me ask you something. When a judge sees 6 citations tied to the same car, what is he supposed to think? My first duty is to the law. I can't run a courtroom on feelings alone. If you believe in second chances, hit that like button, because this story is about the moment I had to decide what justice really meant. Mrs. Morales stood at the podium holding her purse with both hands the way people do when they feel like the whole world is slipping. Her knuckles were pale, her shoulders were stiff. She was trying to keep herself together, but I could see it right away. She'd had more than one sleepless night. After all these years, you notice the small things: worn cuffs on a coat, shoes polished carefully because buying new ones isn't an option, eyes that say, "Please don't make today harder than it already is." And next to her stood a little boy. Small for 9, I later learned, but steady. He had dark hair combed with too much water, a button-down shirt one size too big, and sneakers scrubbed so clean I knew somebody had taken time on them that morning. He wasn't fidgeting the way children usually do in court. He wasn't embarrassed either. He was watching everything: me, the prosecutor, Inspector Quinn, even the camera in the corner that had captured more than one unforgettable moment in that room. I glanced at Inspector Quinn, and he gave me that quiet look that said, "This one may not be what it seems." Quinn had seen almost as much life from that courtroom as I had. He knew when someone walked in trying to fool me, and he knew when someone walked in trying not to fall apart. There's a difference, a big one. "Good morning," I said to the mother. "Good morning, Your Honor," she answered softly, almost apologizing for taking up space. "Who is this handsome young man standing next to you?" She looked down at him, and for the first time a little light came into her face. "My son, Mateo," I smiled. "Mateo, how old are you?" "9, sir." "Sir, not judge, not Your Honor. Sir." A child trying to be respectful in the only way he knew. Those little things matter to me. They always have. Before I tell you where this went, subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the biggest truth. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I still learn something new every week from people society passes right by. I turned back to the file. The dates of the tickets caught my attention first. 3 were on Thursdays, 2 were on Tuesday evenings. 1 was early on a Saturday morning. Patterns matter in court. Human beings live in patterns. Carelessness has one pattern, desperation has another. "Mrs. Morales," I said, "you have several violations here. Help me understand what was happening." She swallowed hard. "I know it looks bad, Your Honor." "Well," I told her gently, "it doesn't just look bad. 6 tickets is a lot of tickets. What am I going to do with you?" That drew the tiniest smile from the boy, and a couple of people in the gallery let out a breath. Humor is important in a courtroom, not to make light of pain, never that, but to remind people that justice is still human. Sometimes when people are scared, a little warmth opens the door to honesty. She nodded quickly. I know, I wasn't ignoring them. I didn't know how I could pay everything." That answer told me something. Most people who don't care start by arguing with the ticket, the officer, the sign, the city, the moon. People who are ashamed usually start with "Hikabridia might or so worry." I know. I asked to see the notices, and the clerk handed up the packet. There were late fees already attached. My heart sank a little. Late fees have a way of multiplying trouble for people who are already drowning. It's easy to talk about personal responsibility when you've never had to choose between a fine and groceries. Why didn't you come in sooner? I asked. She stared at the wood edge of the podium. Because I work mornings cleaning offices, afternoons at a bakery, nights I do home care for an elderly woman 2 streets from us. I couldn't lose the hours. And every week I thought maybe next week would be better. I've heard some version of that sentence thousands of times. Maybe next week would be better. That's the prayer of the working poor. Not luxury, not comfort, just 1 week where nothing else breaks. I asked another question. And the boy? Why did you bring him to court? Before she could answer, Mateo lifted his chin. Because I asked to come. Now that got my attention. The room shifted a little. I could feel it. Children in court can change the atmosphere in an instant. Sometimes it makes things manipulative. Sometimes it makes things truthful. I looked at him carefully. He didn't appear coached. He appeared determined. Did you? I said. Yes, sir. Why? He looked at his mother first, as if asking permission with his eyes. She gave the smallest nod. Because she gets nervous, he said, and because somebody should tell you she's a good mom. I have to tell you something, my friends. I've heard polished speeches from lawyers who bill by the hour. I've heard excuses dressed up in expensive words, but when that little boy said, somebody should tell you she's a good mom, I felt the courtroom soften all at once. Even the prosecutor's posture changed. I kept my face steady. A judge has to. But inside I paused. Your mother's a good mom? I asked him. Yes, sir. How do you know? He answered so fast it was clear he'd been carrying the answer long before he walked in. Because she always makes sure we eat first. Because she stays awake when I'm sick. Because she says she's not hungry when there's only enough chicken for me and my sister. Because she works when her feet hurt. Because she cries in the bathroom when she thinks we can't hear her. And then she comes out smiling. There are moments on the bench when time slows down. That was one of them. I looked at the mother. Her lips were pressed tight. She was trying not to break. I looked at Inspector Quinn. He lowered his eyes. I looked at the gallery. People were no longer waiting for entertainment. They were witnessing something sacred. Share this if you know someone who needs hope. Because what happened next reminded me why compassion belongs in a courtroom. The law gives us structure. Mercy gives that structure a soul. I cleared my throat. Mateo, did your mother ask you to say that? No, sir? She tentato indaku saturo sedel to come in here and rescue her? That brought another faint smile to the room. No, sir. She told me to sit quiet, but I wrote things down in case you needed to know. He reached into the pocket of that oversized shirt and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. Not one of those neat little props adults create for sympathy. This was real. Folded and unfolded many times. Corners gone soft. Pencil marks pressed deep. May I see that white? He handed it to the bailiff, who brought it to me. I unfolded it slowly. On the front he had written in careful block letters, "Things my mom does so you know the truth." Below that was a list. Gets up at 4:45. Makes my lunch even when she's tired. Takes abuela medicine. Walks Sophia to school when car won't start. Works 2 jobs and a half. Does not buy a coat because I needed cleats. Prays in the car. Says we are okay even when she gets red eyes. I looked at that paper longer than I needed to. Sometimes a judge buys himself a second to feel something before he speaks. I thought of my own mother and father, immigrants, people of dignity, people who believed that you worked hard, kept your word, and held your family close even when the world was cold. My father didn't have much schooling, but he had wisdom. He used to say that when you judge a person, you'd better count the burdens they carry before you count the mistakes they made. I put the paper down gently. Mrs. Morales, I said, tell me about Abuela. Her voice trembled. My mother lives with us. She had a stroke last year. She cannot be alone long. On Thursdays, I take her to therapy. Tuesdays, I pick up my daughter from after school and then go to the bakery. Saturday mornings, I bring my mother to dialysis if the van is late. There it was. The pattern in the tickets. Suddenly the dates were no longer just dates. They were the map of a life under strain. Where were these tickets issued? I asked. She explained each one. The hydrant ticket was outside a pharmacy while she ran in for her mother's prescription after being told insurance had delayed coverage. The loading zone was in front of a medical supply store where she was picking up adult diapers and gloves because the discount ended that day. 1 meter violation came while she was upstairs in a 3rd-floor apartment, changing an elderly client who had fallen. Another came when her son's school called because he was having breathing trouble. Let me ask you something, my friends. Have you ever noticed how crisis doesn't take turns? It piles on. One problem calls another problem, and by the time you solve the first one, the third has already arrived. If this story means something to you, leave a comment, because the people in my courtroom aren't statistics. They're human beings caught in traffic between hardship and dignity. I asked to see the medical bills, and she hesitated. Then she opened her purse, not a designer bag, just a tired purse doing its best. From it came folded receipts, pharmacy printouts, bus cards, a utility shutoff warning, and a clinic statement with a balance circled in blue ink. Nothing theatrical, everything worn from use. The prosecutor stepped forward and, to his credit, did not posture. He looked through the documents, then nodded once as if to say, "Yes, these are real. Good prosecutors understand that justice is not a contest, it's a responsibility." "Your Honor," he said, "the city's records do match the location she described." That mattered. Facts matter. Compassion without facts can become foolishness, but facts with no compassion can become cruelty. My job has always been to walk that narrow bridge and not fall off either side. I studied the mother again. "Why didn't you ask for help?" She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "From who?" That answer sat in the room like a bell. "From who? You tell me." People say, "Ask for help," as if help is standing around on every corner waiting to be claimed. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I can tell you a lot of decent people are carrying impossible loads because they don't have one person to call at 6 in the morning when the car won't start, and the medicine has to be picked up, and the child has to get to school, and the shift starts in 45 minutes. I leaned back. "How much do you owe in total?" The clerk gave me the number. With penalties and fees, it had climbed to an amount that might not sound devastating to some people, but when you're balancing rent, food, medicine, and transportation, it might as well be a mountain. The mother closed her eyes when she heard it. Then Mateo tugged on her sleeve. "Can I tell him now?" he whispered. She shook her head instantly. "No." I noticed. Judges notice whispers. "Tell me what?" I asked. The boy looked up at me, then at his mother, then down at his shoes. "I brought money," he said. You could feel the air change again. The mother's face flushed with embarrassment. "Mateo, no." But he had already reached into his backpack and pulled out a clear sandwich bag full of coins, a few crumpled dollar bills, and one $5 bill folded so carefully it looked ironed. "I saved it from birthdays and shoveling and helping Mr. Lorenzo carry groceries," he said. I know it's not a lot. But she was awake all night. And she said if the fines get too big, maybe we have to sell the car. And if we sell the car, how will she bring Abuela? So I thought maybe you can take mine first. There are some moments no years on the bench can prepare you for. I had to pause. My throat tightened. I'm not ashamed to tell you that. People sometimes expect judges to be made of marble. I'm not marble. I'm a man, a father, a grandfather, a son of immigrants who knew what it meant to sacrifice in silence. I looked down at the bag of coins and thought, this child is trying to carry a burden adults created. And I'll tell you something else. When a 9-year-old walks into court ready to empty his savings for his mother, the issue before me is no longer just municipal code, it is moral reality. Before I tell you what I decided in that moment, subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because what justice requires is not always what people expect. Sometimes the right ruling begins with listening long enough to be changed. I asked the bailiff to place the bag on the clerk's desk, not because I was going to take it, but because I wanted Mateo to know I respected what he had done. Dismissing a child's offering too quickly can feel like dismissing his love. "Mateo," I said, "that is one of the bravest things I've ever seen in this courtroom." He stood a little straighter. "Just didn't see there, sir. To side in there, so. Let me ask you something. If I took your money, what would your mother say to me?" For the first time, he smiled like an actual 9-year-old. "She'd be mad." That got a laugh, including from his mother, who immediately covered her mouth in embarrassment. "Yes," I said, "I think she would be, and I try not to get mothers mad at me before lunch." The laughter broke the tension just enough for everyone to breathe. Sometimes that matters as much as the ruling itself. Then I turned serious again. "Mrs. Morales, has anyone ever told you that your son sees everything?" She looked at him with tears finally slipping free. "Too much," she whispered. That line hit me hard. Too much. There are children who don't see enough of love and children who see too much of struggle. This boy had become watchful before his time. I asked Mateo, why didn't you tell your teacher or some other adult you were worried? He answered quietly, because my mom doesn't like people thinking we need pity. That told me even more about the mother. Pride is not always arrogance. Sometimes pride is the last possession poverty hasn't stolen. Inspector Quinn shifted near the rail. He had that look on his face again, the one I'd seen when veterans came in ashamed of tickets they couldn't pay, or when an elderly widow stood trembling over a citation she didn't understand. Quinn is a good man. He knows when a courtroom is becoming a chapel of truth. I asked the clerk for the photographs attached to the violations. One by one, they came up. The hydrant ticket showed her car with the rear wheel just inside the prohibited space. The loading zone ticket showed the trunk slightly open. In one photograph, there was a wheelchair symbol posted near the entrance of the building. In another, you could see what looked like a medical supply box through the back window. The photograph showed me more than the city intended. It showed urgency. Do you have documentation for your mother's dialysis and therapy schedule? I asked. She nodded and handed it over. Dates matched. Times matched. The Thursday pattern matched exactly. The prosecutor spoke again. Your Honor, based on the records, I don't believe she fabricated any of this. That wasn't a small moment. A fair prosecutor can be the difference between a lawful outcome and a just one. I leaned forward. Mrs. Morales, you understand these signs exist for a reason. Hydrants must stay clear. Loading zones are not personal parking. Meter rules apply to everybody. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor, I do. I'm sorry. And if I simply excuse everything without saying that plainly, I'm not doing you any favor, because mercy without accountability is weakness, and accountability without mercy is cruelty. I've said words like that many times in my life, but that day they landed deeper in me. Maybe because a child was standing there watching what kind of man I would be. If this touches your heart, hit that like button, because a courtroom can teach all of us what family loyalty really looks like. I knew millions might someday see that clip on Caught in Providence, but in that moment I wasn't thinking about cameras. I was thinking about the example justice was about to set for a little boy. I asked another question. How old is your daughter? 6. And their father? The mother took a breath, like the answer cost her something. Not with us. I didn't push. A courtroom is not the place to turn pain into spectacle. I've always believed a judge should know the difference between necessary truth and needless humiliation. Instead, I asked, who helps you at home? No one regularly, she said. My neighbor checks on my mother sometimes. Mateo helps more than he should. Mateo looked down again. Children often feel proud when adults notice their burden, and sad at the same time. What do you help with? I asked him. I read to Abuela, and I watched Sofia, and I learned how to warm soup without burning it. That was the moment I thought of my own father most strongly. He came to this country with very little, but he believed in family. We didn't always have ease, but we had each other. My father taught me that dignity wasn't in how much money you had. It was in whether you stood up when your family needed you. That day, in front of me, stood a 9-year-old boy already living that lesson. Then he said something I didn't expect. She says the car is the only thing keeping us from falling all the way down. Now that sentence stayed with me, falling all the way down. Children understand more than adults realize. He wasn't talking about a vehicle. He was talking about the fragile machinery that held their lives together. The school route, the pharmacy, the therapy visits, the bakery shift, the home care job, the grocery store, the laundromat, the emergency trips nobody plans for. I asked the clerk to calculate the amount without late fees for a moment, just so I could see what the original citations had been. Even stripped down, it was too much for this family, and the law did not give me magical powers. Judges don't get to wave away everything simply because their hearts are moved. There are statutes, there are city rules, there is fairness to others who paid their tickets. Every merciful decision must still stand on legal legs. So I began thinking creatively within the boundaries I had. That's a big part of judging well, not ignoring the law, using the law wisely. I turned to the prosecutor. Would the city object if I reviewed these as separate events rather than as willful, repeated disregard, given the corroborating records? He shook his head. No, Your Honor. Good. That opened a door. Then I asked Mrs. Morales, have you ever tried you and done anything you didn't know? You done that in the drought and no. Tickets before this period? No. Any after? No, Your Honor. I started parking farther and walking even when I'm late. That mattered too. A person trying to correct behavior deserves a judge's attention. Let me tell you something, my friends. People don't need a judge to be impressed by perfection, they need a judge to recognize effort. A court should never become a place where struggle is punished more harshly than indifference. I asked the clerk to verify her driving record. Clean. I asked whether the inspection had since been updated. It had. Registration current. Insurance current. She was not living recklessly. She had been surviving badly for a short stretch and then trying to recover. Then came the twist that left even me stunned. As the clerk returned the documents, a small photograph slipped from the mother's purse and fell onto the floor. Mateo bent to grab it, but the bailiff picked it up first and handed it to me along with the rest of the papers. I almost set it aside, but I looked. It was a photo of the inside of their refrigerator. At first, I didn't understand. Then I noticed what it showed: half a carton of eggs, a gallon of water, a bottle of medicine, and a note taped to a shelf that read, "Mateo, please leave yogurt for Sophia." I looked up. "What is this?" The mother went pale, truly pale. "It's nothing," she said. "Mrs. Morales." She exhaled in defeat. "My church asked families who needed food to text what was left in the fridge. They said it helped them know what to bring without embarrassing people. That photograph told me more than 10 speeches could have. You can fake tears. You can rehearse a story, but you don't accidentally carry a picture of an almost empty refrigerator into court unless scarcity is your daily companion." The gallery went silent again. I saw one woman reach for a tissue. The prosecutor looked down at his papers. Inspector Quinn gave me a glance that said what I was feeling. This family is hanging on by fingertips. Share this if you believe people deserve to be seen before they are sentenced, because the next question I asked changed everything. In my courtroom, the truth often arrives one small detail at a time. "Mateo," I said, "do you know why your mom got these tickets?" He nodded. "Tell me in your own words." He took a breath. "Because there's never enough time. I want you to sit with that, because there's never enough time, not because she didn't care, not because she thought the rules didn't apply, because when you are poor and responsible for too many people and too few resources, time itself becomes a luxury item." He went on. "Sometimes she has to choose which thing to be late for, and every choice makes another problem." That little boy had just described structural hardship with more clarity than some policy experts. From the mouth of a child came the plain truth of working-class life. I felt a heaviness in my chest. This reminded me not only of my parents, but of my own health journey and the gratitude I've come to feel for every meaningful human moment. When you face the fragility of life, you stop wasting time pretending compassion is weakness. It isn't weakness. It's the highest form of strength when guided by wisdom. I said to the mother, "Your son is extraordinary." She nodded, unable to speak. "And that is because of you. Don't forget that." The boy looked at her, and for a brief second, she looked less like a defendant and more like what she truly was, a tired, loving mother being seen. Now I also had to think of civic responsibility. If I reduced everything to zero with no lesson attached, what message was I sending? That hardship excuses danger? No, I couldn't do that. A judge who lets emotion erase public safety is not compassionate, he is careless. Hydrants matter. Accessibility spaces matter. Emergency access matters. So I told her the truth plainly. So, "Mrs. Morales, listen to me. Your reasons move me. Your son moves me. But if someone's house is on fire, that hydrant cannot be blocked. If a delivery driver needs that loading zone, it cannot be occupied. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor, I do." "Good, because I'm not helping you by pretending otherwise." Then I lowered my voice a little. "But I also know the difference between contempt for the rules and a life collapsing under pressure. That distinction is everything. I've said for years that the law has a spine, but justice has a heart." That day, those words came alive right in front of me. If this story speaks to you, leave a comment and tell me whether you think mercy and accountability can live together, because in that courtroom I was about to prove that they could. I asked Mateo one more question. "What do you want me to know most about your mother?" He didn't hesitate. "That she's trying." 3 words, that's all. Not that she was perfect, not that life had been fair, not that she never made mistakes, just that she was trying. Sometimes that is the holiest testimony in the world. I looked at the mother and then back at the file. I took my glasses off for a moment, something I do sometimes when I need to hear my own conscience more clearly than the paperwork. In that pause, I remembered my father coming home tired, my mother stretching meals, the old neighborhoods where dignity had to survive on very little. I remembered all the people who had once been granted mercy and went on to honor it. And I made my ruling. Here's what I'm going to do. The room leaned in. Even Mateo stopped blinking. I am dismissing the late fees entirely. The mother covered her mouth. I am reducing the underlying violations to a single administrative penalty because I find credible evidence of hardship, corroborated medical obligations, and no prior pattern of disregard before this period. She began to cry in earnest now. But, I said, lifting a finger gently, you are going to complete a community safety session through the city on parking and emergency access, one evening, no cost, and you are going to promise this court that when you are in crisis, you will ask for help before you stack another emergency on top of another violation. Yes, Your Honor, she said, nodding rapidly through tears. I wasn't finished, and the payment on the reduced fine, I looked at the clerk, will be set at an amount she can manage. $10 a month if necessary, no interest. No additional penalties if she stays current. At that, the prosecutor nodded. He understood. The clerk understood. Inspector Quinn understood. This was not a loophole. This was justice calibrated to reality. The mother could barely speak. Thank you. Thank you. Then I turned to Mateo. As for you, young man, the court will not be taking your money. He looked relieved and disappointed all at once. But I'm going to ask you to do something else with it. I want you to keep saving, not because your family should depend on a child, but because you have the heart of a protector, and one day that heart is going to do a lot of good in this world. The boy nodded so solemnly that I nearly smiled again. Then I added, because I meant every word of it, you're a good person. God bless you. The mother started crying harder at that. Sometimes the kindest thing you can say to a struggling parent is not about the fine. It's about the child she has raised. Before emotional moments like this pass you by, subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because there is too much darkness in the world not to notice when goodness stands up in sneakers and speaks the truth. Now you might think that was the end of it. Case closed, tears, relief, cut the clip. But the deepest part of the story happened after the ruling, when I thought we were done. As the clerk finished the paperwork, Mateo looked up at me and asked, "Can I still say one more thing?" I said, "In this courtroom, apparently you can say quite a lot." That drew another round of laughter. He looked at his mother, then back at me. "I just wanted you to know, she didn't park wrong for herself. She always parks wrong for us." Now, if you want to understand why I was speechless, there it is. Not because the sentence was polished, because it was perfect. She didn't park wrong for herself. She always parks wrong for us. In one line, that child separated selfishness from sacrifice more cleanly than many adults ever could. I had no immediate reply, truly. I had to sit with it. I looked down because I felt my eyes sting. A judge doesn't mind being moved, but he must still keep the room together. I took a second, then I said quietly, "That may be the most important thing said in this courtroom all month." And I meant it. The gallery broke into soft applause before I could stop them. Usually I quiet that immediately. Court is not theater, but sometimes humanity arrives so unmistakably that even procedure bows its head for a second. Inspector Quinn leaned toward the rail and said to Mateo, "You take good care of your mom." Mateo answered, "She took care of me first." What am I going to do with a child like that? Honestly, give him a robe in 20 years maybe. I told the mother, "Do not be ashamed of today. Hear me? Shame helps no one. Responsibility helps. Asking for help helps. Letting people see your humanity helps." She nodded. "I just didn't want my children to think I was failing." That's when I gave her one of the truest things I know. A parent is not failing because life is hard. A parent is failing only when love leaves the room. And I don't see that here. Those words stayed with her. I could tell. They stayed with me too. I often say I try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated. That isn't softness. It's moral discipline. It takes discipline to see the person behind the paper. It takes discipline to remember that poverty is not a character defect. It takes discipline to believe that a courtroom can correct behavior without crushing the human spirit. If you believe in second chances, hit that like button, because what happened next proved that mercy, when received with gratitude, can bear fruit faster than cynicism ever will. After the hearing, I asked the clerk to connect Mrs. Morales with a local resource coordinator who worked with families facing transportation and caregiving strain. That wasn't charity theater, that was practical wisdom. Too many courts process pain and then release it back onto the street unchanged. If we can point someone towards stability, why wouldn't we? I also asked discreetly whether someone from a community pantry connected to the courthouse outreach effort could speak with her. Again, no spectacle, no humiliation. Quiet help preserves dignity. As she gathered her papers, Mateo carefully picked up his sandwich bag of coins. He held it like treasure, and to him it was treasure, not just money, but agency, a way to love his mother when he felt powerless. I respected that. Before they left the rail, I asked him, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? He answered without a second's hesitation, a man my mom doesn't have to worry about. That one hit the whole room. Not a baseball player, not a millionaire, not famous. A man his mother doesn't have to worry about. Tell me that doesn't say everything about his life, his heart, and the pressure children absorb when they love someone who is struggling. I smiled, but it was one of those smiles that comes with pain behind it. That's a very good goal, I told him, but don't grow up too fast. He nodded, though I suspected life had already pushed him ahead of schedule. When they turned to leave, Mrs. Morales looked back at me and said, you saw us. So I've heard plenty of thank yous in court, but that one was different. You saw us. Not you helped us, not you saved us. You saw us. My friends, to be seen in your struggle without being reduced to it, that is one of the deepest human needs there is. Later that afternoon, when there was a brief recess, Inspector Quinn came over and said, that kid got me. I said, me too. Quinn shook his head. When he pulled out that money, yes, I said, that's when you know he's been carrying adult worry. Quinn nodded. He meant every penny. He surely did. We stood in silence for a moment. Good silence, the kind that honors what words don't need to disturb. Then Quinn said something I've never forgotten. Judge, some kids tell on their parents. That boy testified for his mother like her whole life depended on it. I answered, to him, it probably did. And there was the truth again. A few weeks passed. That case might have ended there in the public mind, but in my life it didn't. One morning the clerk brought me an envelope with my name written across the front in careful pencil. Inside was a thank you note on lined paper, along with a new drawing done in colored markers. The note was from Mateo. He had written, Dear Judge Caprio, thank you for helping my mom breathe again. She sleeps more now. My sister laughs more. Abuela says you have kind eyes. I am keeping my money, but I gave $10 to church food because you said I have a protector heart. I am trying to keep it. God bless you too. Under that was a drawing of a courtroom. There I was behind the bench, wearing a robe that made me look more like Batman than a judge. His mother was smiling. His grandmother sat in a wheelchair. His sister held a balloon, for reasons known only to 6-year-olds, and in the middle stood Mateo with a cape on. I'm not embarrassed to say I kept that drawing. Why? Because every now and then when the noise of the world gets loud and people begin speaking about law as if it were only force, I like to remember what justice looks like in the eyes of a child. Not domination, not humiliation, recognition, correction, mercy, hope. Months later, I received another update through someone connected to the community services office. Mrs. Morales had completed the safety session. She had not missed a single payment on the reduced fine. More importantly, she had been connected with a transportation assistance program for medical visits and a caregiver support network through a local parish and neighborhood group. The bakery had given her a few more stable hours. The home care family she worked for helped arrange one consistent afternoon each week for her mother's appointments. Not a miracle, just support. But sometimes support is the miracle. And Mateo, he had made the honor roll. When I heard that, I smiled the way an old man smiles when the world gives him one more reason to stay grateful. Because children like that deserve breathing room. They deserve adults who step in before responsibility hardens them too early. Sometime after that, I actually saw the family again. Not in court, thank God. It was at a community event tied loosely to the show, one of those public moments when people come up to say hello because they've seen Caught in Providence and feel like they already know me. The line moved along. Handshakes, photographs, kind words, and then I saw a familiar face peeking from behind his mother's coat. Mateo, I said. His eyes widened. You remembered. Of course I remembered. He stepped forward, a little taller now. Children change quickly. Burdened children sometimes seem older, but when a little pressure lifts, you suddenly notice how young they still are. His mother looked healthier, not carefree, not magically transformed, but steadier, less hunted in the eyes. She told me her mother's health was still difficult but manageable. She told me her daughter was doing well in school. She told me Mateo now insisted on being early for everything because, as she put it, he says he doesn't want to meet your parking rules again. I laughed at that. Then Mateo said very seriously, I told my class that judges can be nice and still mean business. Now there's an endorsement I'll take. I said to him, that's exactly right, because it is. The strongest people I've known are not the ones who confuse harshness with strength. Real strength knows how to be gentle without surrendering principle. Real authority doesn't need to humiliate. It can instruct. It can redirect. It can bless. Asked him whether he still had his savings. He said some of it. But I gave some to a kid at church whose mom lost her job. There it was again, mercy reproducing itself. That's what people miss. When you treat someone with dignity in their hardest hour, they often carry that dignity forward to someone else. Cynicism spreads, yes, but compassion spreads too. If this story gives you hope, share it with someone who needs to remember that goodness still exists. Subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because every once in a while we all need proof that a soft heart and a strong spine can live in the same body. And let me tell you another thing I've learned in all these years. Children are some of the best witnesses in the world when they are speaking from love. They don't always know the legal terms. They won't cite statutes, but they know who stayed up with the fever. They know who pretended not to be hungry. They know who parked in the wrong place because the right place was too far from the emergency. They know who is trying. That day, Mateo wasn't just defending his mother. He was defending the invisible labor of struggling women everywhere. The women who hold families together with receipts in their purses and pain in their feet. The women who skip meals without announcement. The women who apologize for taking up room in the world. If I was speechless, it was because a 9-year-old boy found a way to speak for all of them in a sentence no one in that courtroom could forget. She didn't park wrong for herself. She always parks wrong for us. You could build an entire moral philosophy on that line. One of the tragedies of modern life is that people are increasingly treated like summaries. Late on rent, failed inspection, multiple citations, single mother, low income, problem case. But no person is a summary. Every human being is a long sentence with clauses, history, grief, effort, contradiction, and hope. If I forget that on the bench, I have no business sitting there. This case also reminded me of something very personal, my gratitude for the life I've had, for the example my parents set, and for the chance to spend my years not simply enforcing order, but humanizing it. My family taught me faith without showmanship, compassion without naivete, dignity without pride. You bring those lessons with you onto the bench, whether you mean to or not. Sometimes people ask me why certain moments in court move me so deeply. The answer is simple, because I know these people. Maybe not by name, maybe not from my own exact biography, but in spirit, I know them. I know the households where the refrigerator is negotiated one shelf at a time. I know the parents who shield children from worry and fail because love cannot hide exhaustion forever. I know the boys who become old in the eyes before they hit middle school because they hear too much through thin apartment walls. And I know this too. A little mercy at the right moment can interrupt a cycle of despair. Not solve everything, not erase hardship, but interrupt it. That's sometimes enough to change a trajectory, a reduced fine, a realistic payment plan, a referral to support, a word of blessing spoken at the right time, a child leaving court with his savings intact and his faith in fairness strengthened rather than destroyed. These are not small things. These are the hinges history swings on in ordinary lives. I've been doing this for 35 years, and if those years have taught me anything, it's that justice must never become so efficient that it stops being wise. We are not machines processing infractions. We are moral beings entrusted with other people's vulnerable hours. That should humble every judge, every prosecutor, every officer, every clerk. I remember that morning so vividly still, the scrape of shoes on the courtroom floor, the faint rustle of papers, the nervous way the mother held her purse, the clear plastic bag of coins, the sound of a little boy's voice cracking only slightly as he tried to sound older than he was, the relief in her face when she realized I was listening not just to the charges, but to the truth. A lot of people saw that story later and called it heartwarming. And yes, it was. But I want to be careful with that word. Warmth is not the whole story. There was pain in that room. There was fatigue. There was private humiliation. There was a child carrying too much. The beauty of the moment was not that suffering vanished. It was that suffering was met with understanding rather than indifference. And perhaps that is why the clip traveled so far and touched so many people, not because I did something extraordinary, but because the world is thirsty for examples of authority behaving with humanity. People want to believe power can still be kind. They want to believe institutions can still recognize innocence, effort, and love. They want to believe that being judged does not always mean being reduced. So I try, case by case, person by person, to make the bench a place where accountability and mercy shake hands. Sometimes I fail. Sometimes the law gives me less room than my heart would like. Sometimes a person standing before me is not ready for mercy and would only misuse it. A judge must know that too. Compassion is not gullibility, but when I see sincerity, responsibility, and honest struggle, I believe the law is strong enough to bend toward wisdom without breaking. That day with Mateo and his mother, I saw sincerity. I saw responsibility. I saw honest struggle. I also saw something rarer, a child whose love had made him brave. And I'll tell you the truth. Long after the cameras are off and the clips are shared and the comments fade and the day's docket is forgotten, that is what remains with me. Not the violation number, not the ordinance, the boy. The boy who stood there in clean sneakers and an oversized shirt and said, in effect, if you're going to judge my mother, then judge the whole truth. What choice did I have but to listen? What choice did I have but to remember that the purpose of law is not simply to punish disorder, but to preserve human possibility? What choice did I have but to make sure that when that little boy walked out of my courtroom, he believed adults in authority were still capable of wisdom? I think often about the kind of man he said he wanted to become, a man his mother doesn't have to worry about. There's so much honor in that, so much tenderness, so much quiet masculinity in the best sense, protection without swagger, responsibility without performance. If more boys were taught that strength looks like that, the world would be a gentler place. And his mother, what can I say about her except that she represented countless women I've seen over the years? Women who are one flat tire away from crisis, one fever away from missing work, one missed payment away from a spiral, yet they still show up, hair combed, papers gathered, children fed, hearts breaking privately. If society understood their heroism, we would write our policies differently and our judgments more carefully. Let me ask you something before I go. If you had been sitting where I was sitting, looking at that little boy, his mother, the tickets, the medical records, the bag of coins, the nearly empty refrigerator photo, what would you have done? Tell me what you would have done, because these are the questions that reveal not just who judges are, but who we are as a people. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom. Leave a comment if you believe compassion and accountability belong together. I read that spirit even when I don't read every word. As for me, I walked out of court that day grateful. Grateful for my parents, grateful for Providence, grateful for the chance to witness courage in small bodies and large hearts, grateful that after all these years I can still be surprised by goodness. I gave my ruling. The law was satisfied. Mercy was honored. A mother stood a little taller. A child kept his savings, and I hope a little more of his childhood. And I was reminded once again that justice, when it is worthy of the name, does not merely close cases. It lifts burdens. It tells the truth without crushing the truthful. It corrects behavior without humiliating the struggling. It sees. That day, a 9-year-old boy defended his mom, and yes, for a moment, Judge Frank Caprio was speechless. But in the silence, I knew exactly what mattered. Love had entered the courtroom ahead of the law, and the law, thank God, was wise enough to make room for it. God bless you. Take care of yourself. And remember this, the strongest justice in the world is the kind that still leaves room for mercy, but nothing prepared me for what walked into my courtroom next.